This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we are discussing red and green, the revolution, interviews, and rock and roll color on Light Talk.
Say you want a revolution. And this is David in Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Welcome to episode 132. So, a couple of things today before we get started. We first want to talk a little bit about LDI, and it's only a month away. Do you guys realize that?
I can't even think about it yet, but I will because you just mentioned it.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I got another flight before then, right? It's like, that's like a mile away at this point.
Oh, what's your other flight? Where's that going?
I'm going to Texas next week to do a program review.
On Steve's school, right? On SMU?
No, I think Steve's school is safely in IRTA. This is another school that wants to be in IRTA.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. What city?
It's in Texas.
That's the state, Stan.
I know.
Okay.
I think I'm flying into Austin.
Oh, okay. Well, that could be anywhere. It could be in San Antonio. It could be anywhere in Central Texas.
No, I'm going to go visit this really beautiful place I've heard of that I've not been to called San Marcos.
Oh, San Marcos. It is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to San Marcos. Steve, have you been to San Marcos?
Yes, it's ground zero for cannabis in Texas.
Is that so?
Stan's coming back a happy man.
I'll be floating back in a cloud then, I guess.
That's fantastic.
I can go back to my good old days.
That's great. San Marcos. Party in San Marcos with Stan. Oh, by the way, our swag is in its last design phase. So we can't tell you what our secret swag is yet, but everybody who shows up will get part of it or a piece of it or whatever we want to call it, right? So that's happening. Also, a couple of really cool things happened this week on our Facebook group. And one of them is that one of our listeners came up with a great idea about how to make a prop coal-burning fire pit.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
As it turns out, they use this little device. I think it's probably this little Chinese sort of LED device called the time tunnel. So we're going to be looking into that. You guys have any announcements before we get started? Nope. I guess not much is happening.
Let's rock and roll. Let's roll, baby.
All right. Steve has our first listener question.
It's Rory in Cleveland, and Rory writes, and this could be a man or a woman, I'm not sure, but Rory says, I have my first job interview. What do I wear? What do I bring? Let's start with the easy what do I bring first. And I would say multiple resumes. You don't want to show up somewhere and have one resume and all of a sudden there's 6 people in the room you're chatting with. So multiple resumes, bring your business cards. And I presume you have a website because probably the people who are interviewing you will have looked at your website before you arrive. And so to that end, I would probably bring myself a little 8x10 or 11x4 portfolio, and you've got it sitting on the floor if you need it. So that's kind of what I would bring with me. What to wear? That's a hard question. I would say I wouldn't worry about this too much. I would wear to the job interview what you would wear on a first date. And I think you kind of are safe there. It's probably something that is business casual kind of look. I would stick with kind of neutral colors like blue, gray, black, white. I wouldn't show up in a pair of nasty tennis shoes and a nasty T-shirt.
Well, it depends on what your first date is. I mean, if you're going to a mosh pit, yeah, you would wear that, right?
I don't know. Let's say your first date's at Starbucks.
Oh, okay.
Or your first date is at a concert. Okay. Then you're probably going to wear something nice. A pair of pressed pants, some type of shirt or sweater, and maybe a blazer or a sport coat over that. The problem with your first interview, particularly if you're a guy, is that if you don't wear a suit, and a lot of people are not going to wear a suit, if you don't wear a suit, then you spend hours and hours worrying about what to wear. The nice thing about wearing a suit is that it's a uniform laid out for you. But I think in the theater these days, I think you could be a little bit more business casual. And I would say probably the same thing goes for a young woman. I think you have a dress and maybe a blazer over that, flats rather than heels. What do you guys think?
Maybe that's my problem with first dates. I don't get many first dates because I'm wearing the wrong thing.
That could be it.
I'm dating again. Oh my God, that's someone.
That could be your
awful.
whole issue right there. Steve took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the first thing that came into my head was business casual. So you hit that for me. So I agree. And I would also say maybe if you remember that you're a designer, so think like one.
Good point.
What's the impression? That's the message you want to send. I remember in the days when I was young, there were two designers who stood out that when they would come to focus, it was Ken Billington and it was Paul Gallo, and they always dressed nice. Like it was obvious they were not going to get on the ladder and go focus the light. They were playing a different role, and Ken still does that. He wears a tie. I'm not saying you should wear a tie, but I'm just saying, just think about the message that you send, and that goes for women too. It's like if you're a costume designer, you should be conscious of what you're wearing. You're a designer, so I think you think like a designer, and that should reflect that.
Okay, now I would say this depends on how many people you're interviewing with also. This is kind of controversial, this whole dress thing. I have always believed that you almost can never really overdress because you got to show respect to the people who are interviewing you. And unless you know them really well, and chances are you don't, you kind of have to assume that they're expecting a certain professionalism that you're going to be walking in with and a certain amount of respect. So if you don't normally wear a jacket, I would still wear a jacket. And you could walk into the office or conference room and see what everybody else is wearing. And if they're not wearing jackets, take your jacket off when you sit down. So you are part of them. You look more comfortable. You could do that. I don't know about strategies for clothes. I'm just telling you that I'm trying to put, that we have, the three of us have interviewed a lot of people because we've all been on search committees. So you really have to sort of gauge where everyone's at, and then you can have to be able to improvise if you have to. But I really think you can't overdress. You can certainly underdress. And that's the last thing you want to do is walk into a place where everyone's in suit and ties and you come in with khakis and a T-shirt or something like that.
I'm listening to you, David. Maybe there's something to be said for, not wearing the uniform of a corporate titan when you're coming to be a theatrical artist, or not coming in like you're the guy who owns the head shop when you're coming. I just think that clothes send a message, and I think any costume designer we would talk to would agree. So just consciousness about your audience and consciousness about the message you're sending.
Yeah, no political statements. You don't want to wear a T-shirt that says something that's political.
Yeah, so-and-so for president, right? Or whatever, or a red hat or, whatever.
It also depends where you're interviewing.
Sure.
Right.
Rory doesn't say where he or she is interviewing. So maybe if you're interviewing for a sales position at ETC, that's a different type of look that you put together than if you are interviewing to be the lighting designer for Christie's auction house.
Yeah.
Or you're going to go to work for CBS.
Right. Yeah.
Or you're going to go to work for Disney or the local theater company.
Right.
I think the thing is it doesn't want to be wrinkled. It doesn't want to be dirty. It doesn't want to be worn out. And I would say if you don't own one, I would buy a wristwatch right now. So you've got some accessories, nice shoes,
Right.
nice belt, and a nice watch. Also, the watch, you can casually look at your watch to see what time it is.
No, never do that.
No. What I see happening quite often, particularly with students, is they pull their cell phone out.
Never do that.
That's their clock.
Interesting.
And so it's they kind of go, here comes my cell phone out. Oh, it's 11:55. It's getting close to lunch. They don't mean anything by it. They're just trying to. They know the interview is going to last an hour until
you
lunch.
don't
Things
know.
are winding down.
Why would why do you need to look at the time?
I see it constantly. It's like a little
Interesting.
gerbil.
I think that's a
It's pet that
problem.
comes
You
out.
I
shouldn't
think
look
that's
at
a
the
very
time.
interesting perspective that
Yeah.
Steve just mentioned, because I wouldn't have thought of that. And I have seen that lately. It's true. And I stopped wearing a wristwatch a long time ago because the phone had the time for me. But it would be rude, and I might even do it.
But why are you looking at the time? I don't get it.
Well,
you're the interviewer.
I'll give
if
an
they
example.
want it to be a 2-hour interview, it's a 2-hour interview, right?
Well, when we do portfolios reviews, for example, they're set at 15 minutes. It's 5 minutes to look at their portfolio and about 10 minutes to talk about how they're doing in the program, and we set a timer for them to help them, not go over. So there's something to be said for being. I agree with Steve. There's something to be said for being aware of the time, and there's something to be said that is a little rude to sort of pull out your phone to do
it's
that.
rude to look at your watch too. If I had someone looking at their watch,
you could maybe get a glance at it
interview,
and it not be so apparent. I mean, that's
Well, hang on. You're in California.
this is true.
You got the Tesla and the pig. Everyone knows that if you're going to make it in L.A., you need a nice haircut.
Yes.
You need a nice belt,
Yes.
polished shoes, and a nice watch as an accessory.
At least a Rolex, but you can borrow that from somebody.
But then you can pull off the blue jeans. If you've got a nice pair,
Right,
if you've got a nice belt and a nice pair of shoes, the blue jeans you can pull that off.
That's funny because that's what I do. I do nice. My shoes are always polished. They're always buffed up and shiny. I do like to wear a sport coat, but I don't like to wear a tie, right? And that's what. But I don't have a watch. Now I have been thinking. Let me ask you this, Steve. Would one of those fancy, iWatch, what are they called? Apple Watches work with that?
iWatch.
And you know what? I think you could program it to give you a little tap every 5 minutes.
No. Go spend for $500 or less. You can buy yourself a nice Seiko.
Sure.
And it'll never die. Get an automatic watch.
I've got them.
They're beautiful.
They're sitting in my drawer. I just don't have them taken out.
You don't need a Rolex.
I can't. I'm not going to get I do have some beautiful. I have a classic Swatch. I have some other fossils.
Swatch.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have Swatches, man.
Do you still have a classic polyester laser shoe
Of course, from the 70s. Yes, of course.
Of
course I have it.
He looks great holding a white Russian in it.
No, I don't really have it, but I did have it. Big wide lapels, the whole 9 yards.
Everyone who's listening to this right now who knows me are laughing their asses off because I don't dress well at all. So
Well, maybe you should give that some thought, David.
Well, David, I think you have the next question.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that
this
wonderful
pig out of its
segue.
misery.
Doug from Cambridge, Mass. says, David, I guess that's me, spoke about using color use in episode 14, titled, We're All About Color. I know this was a while ago, but I'm listening in reverse order.
That's pretty funny.
Something that's a really good, just to get
that
off
would be
the
good for us to
question,
do.
That's a great approach because then you save all the brain damage for the end when you have to listen to 1 and 2. Okay, why start off and then okay. So I know this was a while ago, but I'm listening in reverse order. He said, red enhances red objects, and green enhances green objects, and opposite negates color or grays it out. But what if the costumes and sets mix a lot of green and red? Also, what about blue?
And every other color in the spectrum.
What about blue? Where does that fit in?
Clearly Doug is preparing a light plot for the Santa display at Macy's.
Yeah, red and green. You're right. It's those wonderful colors. Anyway, for all of our listeners who have not listened to episode 14, go listen to it because that episode is all about color. And Stan gets into the physics of color. We talk about the red-green theory, which is something that John Gleason taught me. And we also talk about the relativity of color, contrasting colors, how the brain deciphers color.
There's a lot of material.
There's a lot of stuff.
Subject.
We can spend hours talking about this. We're not going to do that. But Doug's asking specifically, what does red do to red? What does green do to green? And what about blue? Getting back to the whole physics of how we see color. We see color because of the light waves that are reflected back to us from the object that the light is hitting. So it reflects back certain wavelengths. Obviously, something that's red is going to reflect back red wavelengths. If you hit it with green, it's going to look gray.
Black.
Right, it's going to look black or gray, whatever. It's not going to be like Vanta black.
No, it's not Vanta black, but there's no red coming back at your eyes. So what does it look like?
Yeah, because there's no red wavelengths in green light. So we all sort of know that. And it gets back to what about blue? Well, okay. The best color light you can use to reflect color is not red on red or green on green. It's white.
Full range of white.
Now, depending, of course, on the color temperature and all that. Part of the question is, what if the set has a mixture of red, like a red palette and a green palette? There are a lot of objects that are red and green. Well, you have to be really careful and use some clear light. Now, I'm not saying white light, I'm saying clear light, so that you reflect back both the red and the green and the blue, okay? So if you were like, let's say you had like an object on stage that's sort of like a medium blue color, or let's say it's a green blue color. Let's say it's like turquoise or something like that. If you hit that with green light, you're going to see green, okay? If you hit that turquoise with a red light, you're going to see gray. It's going to be grayed out, all right? You'll see some wavelengths coming back, but not a lot. So you always have to be careful with these colors to make sure that it's reflecting back the actual color of the material, unless you want to change that color. Does that answer the question, guys?
I think it does, and I only have one thing to add without going down the rabbit hole into the deep, deep well of color, which there is so much to talk about. But
which we talk about in episode 14, right?
Yeah, go back to 14. But I would just remind that David is talking about filtering or CMY or LED, whatever it is, to make colored light. But just remember this, Doug. What is the source of light in the first place? Is it an incandescent? Is it a discharge lamp? Is it an LED? Because that light itself has certain color characteristics. Like, just look up spectral power distribution and understand that every light source has a different sort of recipe of colored wavelengths in it. So something like incandescent doesn't have a lot of blue. It just happens to have a lot of red. So it's great at red and not so good at blue, and so on and so forth. And daylight, sun, midday, overcast sky, it's got everybody. It's got the whole party. It's got all the wavelengths in about the same amplitude. So just look up spectral power. That will help you understanding that, and then the choices you make in filters, right, in combination to the object.
What do you think, Steve?
No. I think everything that had to be said was said.
Okay. Steve.
Episode 14 is like classic Coke.
It is classic.
After that, it became like new Coke. You want to go back to the first 14 episodes.
Steve is right. It's become
yeah, we didn't even
generic.
touch CRI. I mean, go back to we've got all that. It's all there.
Go back. It's the only way to go.
Rose in the UK asks, whatever happened to the ETC revolution? It sounds great on paper. Well, this was a nice stroll down memory lane for me, because I remember the Source 4 revolution. I remember how excited we all were. So I started to dig to see if I could find one. And I did. I find one in Asia. There's 2 used ones.
Oh, come on. They're still in the theaters. I've seen them in
I'm
theaters.
just saying there was no price on them. So I was curious if I could pick one up. And I couldn't really find one for sale. And then, of course, our good friends at ETC have a section of their website called, discontinued items. So I went and I read up and reminded myself of all the cool things that the Source 4 revolution had. So it's out there, and I'm sure lots of people own them. I don't know. I haven't rented one in a long time, but I will say this about that light. It's not light. Like, at the time it came out, it would have seemed really heavy, 79 pounds, right? And it was big, but it was smooth. It was slow, but it was smooth. It had that beautiful incandescent lamp. You could put in like 26 gels. It had modules that you could interchange. I remember seeing them on tour with national tours of shows, and they would just moved beautifully. So they really had some really phenomenal qualities. Why they didn't last? Just better things came along, I guess. And they were large and expensive. And I remember City Theatrical coming out with the auto yoke, which could put a Source 4. It's very similar kind of technology. So what happened to it? I guess they sold them. I guess there's a lot of them out there. Maybe David can talk, or Steve can talk about whether they've used one or seen one recently. But it was a beautiful incandescent light with a lot of what we now expect in the features that we see in really high quality moving lights.
Yeah, the revolution was designed, I know that Tom Littrell, who will be on our show, by the way, in like 3 weeks, he was one of the chief designers on that, if not the chief designer. And it was sort of ETC's answer to the VL1000.
Yeah.
The VL1000, when it came out, was an incandescent fixture. It was silent, or relatively silent, unless you use the zoom. It was pretty silent because it had no fans, but it was a CMY color mixing system. The difference between Revolution and the VL1000 was that with the Revolution, you can customize it. You didn't have to buy everything. Like if you buy a VL1000, you're going to get shutters, you're going to pay for them, right? Or if you're going to get CMY, but you're going to pay for it. Things like that, because it's all one package. But the Revolution, you could piecemeal it. You didn't have to buy the scroller, but if you want multiple colors, you buy the scroller. It had a shutter module, it had irises, had all these things that you could piecemeal it. So it became a very customizable light. And I think that's what ETC was really banking on. I also believe that it was brighter than the VL1000 incandescent, the original one. I'm pretty sure because
I don't know. The Revolution was, depending on what mode you put it in, was between 7,000 and 10,000 lumens.
That's exactly right. I'm looking at the cut sheet right now.
So what was
Steve
the VL1000? Right. Do we know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, I have to go back and look at discontinued
It was still
products
pretty.
there
It was still pretty bright. I remember.
No, it was a bright light. It was a good light.
Yeah, Revolutions were used a lot in the West End. I saw several West End shows over the past 15, 20 years, and you see a lot of Revolutions out there. I've used Revolutions. A lot of times when I go into a theater that has an inventory, the theater bought Revolutions, and of course I'll use them because they're great, even as movable specials. They're wonderful. But because, and this is just a theory that I'm just throwing out there, I'm sure Tom will be able to talk about this in a few weeks. But I think what happened was they started to break down because they were modularized. Things would move around. I know that the scrollers broke down on me in some cases, had some problems with shutters sometimes, but they were a really good, quiet light.
I'll speculate on why they broke down because one of the things that and Steve can Steve might know this to confirm it or not, but a lot of the touting about using the LEDs in moving lights is the lack of infrared getting into all the parts and the lack of UV destroying parts and belts and insulation on wires and connectors, which gives them a longevity. And I bet there was a lot of heat and a lot of UV inside the casing of the Revolution, and that's a good thing. I wonder if that was part of it.
I think it was Wibrin. I mean, Wibrin was of its day, but it was not very good. It's now gone the way of the buffalo. I think. Where I saw Revolutions being used were in concert halls. So if it was a symphonic hall, they threw a Revolution in there. I think the problem is that you could have 2 of 4 different modules put on board. You had an iris module, a shutter module, and I think there was 2 gobo wheels. One was static and one was rotating.
Yeah, sounds right.
But that's a hard one. Are you going to take the shutters or the iris module? And then all of a sudden, I need them both. Well, no gobos for you. And color scrolling, that's still going to be noisy. So I think I think there were better, more complete moving lights out there. They weren't particularly cheap.
No.
So I just think they were maybe 8 or 9 years late coming to the game. Also, they were big. They were 38, 39 inches tall. That's a big light.
33. I'm looking at the spec right now. 33 inches, 33.7 inches tall. Steve, you mentioned, and David, you mentioned the 1000s. Back in the day when I wanted to pick a couple up for teaching purposes at UF, and to Steve's point, I was agonizing. 1, do I get the incandescent or the arc? Because they had both. 2, do I get the iris or I get the shutter? I had to pick one or the other. And I made a decision that I sort of regret. I said, well, for teaching purposes, maybe I should get one of each. Which didn't. Okay, so I thought I got one with an iris and I got one with the shutters. Yeah. And now they're still running for us. We still use them. We're using them on the show we opened tonight. But I sort of regret that I didn't just pick one. I should have waited. I should have said shutters or iris. I should have not made that. I think Steve's point is a good one about the decision, the agonizing decision there.
And let's face it, you're going to buy all 4 modules. If you are anybody buying that light, if you're a rental company or a university, you're going to buy all 4 modules because you're not going to not have the other 2 because you might need them on the next show.
Right.
So, there was a lot of moving pieces on the Revolution.
That's pretty punny.
I think its strength was it was a bright, clean light, and
Yeah.
it was. I remember it being kind of dead silent.
Yeah, dead silent,
That,
very
that
silent.
was that was the strengths of it.
I agree. And when it moved, it seemed to me when I saw it on stage, I never designed with one, that it had a beautiful pan tilt resolution. Like there was no stepping. Like it was a really smooth moving, tracking, pan and tilt.
It was a good light, especially for its time.
Yeah.
And I have to give credit to Tom and ETC for coming out with something different. No one else had a moving light that came in pieces like that. Not, certainly not modularized like that. So kudos for them.
The reason it was modularized was if they put all 4 modules in, it would be another foot longer.
Massive.
I mean, that's the other thing too. Is it doesn't matter if it's Clay Packy or ETC or you pick the company. They're trying to make the smallest, lightest, most functional light on the planet for the tightest profit margin on it. And ETC's light was a little expensive and big for that time.
Well, you are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers. And this week, Light Talk is sponsored by...
A favorite tourist destination among stagehands and designers, the cheeky rigger of Sheffield has heard the call and is expanding our operation to the Far East. That's right, Cheeky Rigger Asia, our You Will Almost Never Die safety harness, the complete holiday cologne line, and our Give It a Whirl 6-day underwear will soon be available in the Far East. Unless you live in Australia. Then it will be available in the near north. For months, Cheeky Rigger has struggled with the question of stagehand nutrition. Let's face it, the theater can be a busy place. How many times have you wanted to sit down and have a healthy meal, only to realize you don't have time? The show must go on and you do not get a meal break. Why? Because you're a scab, my friend. Back on your feet, mate. But let's face it, a soggy sandwich on the run doesn't butter the parsnips. Cheeky Rigger Asia, partnering with those giants of the kitchen, Pet Sweat of Japan, are proud to introduce our newest products. The Cheese Popsicle. That's right, the tasty treat of frozen English cheddar cheese on a stick. Not filling enough? Then try our chilled fish and chips popsicle. And we have not forgotten the most important meal of the day, breakfast. All the way from the docks of Brighton, the Gut Buster popsicle. Not that hungry? Then try the half Gut Buster. But wait, perhaps you have a sweet tooth. Then try our spotted dick on a stick. That's right, the spotted dick popsicle.
What is that?
But what about our friends in Scotland? The cheeky rigger has not forgotten you, Chief. The haggis popsicle. Haggis, that savory pudding made from heart, liver, and lungs, frozen and encased in a sheep's stomach, now in handy popsicle form. Yummy. Order our Christmas gift box, and we will throw in a bottle of funky roadcase cologne. The Cheeky Rigger of Sheffield. We make underwear, too.
Oh, my God. How do you come up with this stuff? It's like, well, it's great.
Well, I mean, those are all real things.
I know. And you showed the can of the dick. What is it?
Spotted dick.
Spotted dick.
It's like I showed that to Pam. I was like, "Holy shit, it's real."
And if you go down to Brighton, on the docks, the fishing fleet comes in at about 4 a.m. Those guys are hungry, and they have the Gut Buster, which is this huge English breakfast. And if it's too much, you can have a half portion. But
Wow.
even a half portion is like the size of your body.
So that spotted dick can't look like sponge cake with like icing on it. Is that what it is?
It's a pudding with raisins in it.
It's a pudding with raisins in it.
It's
Right.
it's right
That's
down the
great.
road from haggis and some really bad British food.
It's like unbelievable. This sponsor is a top 2.
All I
gotta
can
say.
tell you is that there's nothing better to start your day with than a spotted dick on a stick. That's all I have to say.
That's just so funny to say. And the fact is, first I read that and I went, "What's he doing?" And then he posts, "Oh, it's real." Okay.
It is real. No, it's real. Like that's the truth is funny. That's all it is.
Yeah, the truth is funny.
The truth
It's
is
true.
funny.
And now back to Light Talk.
It is time for our Let's Talk About segment. And today the subject is strategies that we use when dealing with conflicts within a student production team. So this comes from sort of a teaching point of view and also a learning point of view. We've all been involved in different crises moments. So guys, what do you think? Are there any specific strategies you like to use when there's a crisis happening?
I got the simplest one. I just go home.
You go home.
I just go home.
Let them fight it out.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's right. That's the strategy. There's like two high school kids. Just let them battle until they're weary. I don't. That's not serious.
That's not serious.
Patience, kindness, tough love, soft love. I don't know. Tough one.
I think a lot of this has to do with the personalities of the people involved. And it's really not that unusual than working in the profession, to tell you the truth, that you have to understand that, there's some people with larger egos than other people. There are some people that are really involved in the power politics. And also with students, especially with students, sometimes you get a very competitive nature going on within a group of students. And that could be enhancing, unfortunately, this type of problem-solving issues, these critical moments where people allow their own points of view to overshadow acting like a true collaborator.
You used a good word there, David, critical. I think to work in our profession, let me just say this, criticism, and I mean it in the most positive sense of the word, is the breakfast of champions. and I think the hard part is to hear criticism in the room with other people. Right. And I notice that sometimes if I'm offering critical analysis to a student by themselves, it's just the two of us, it's one thing. But if I do it when other people are around, so I almost want to tell students to develop a tough skin, right? And to develop an appetite for the feedback rather than a defensive posture, and that's from anyone, from who, and if I'll ask a student a question and if they give me a really good answer, go, oh, okay, not what I would do, but that's fair enough. Okay, that's what you want to do. But I think it is a personality thing, and developing what I call the collaborative disposition, which is very different than any other art form.
Okay, so one of the things we do here is we are a scenographic program. So our students study 3 to 4 areas of design, and they travel together as a group starting in the first year. And they don't really kind of go into their separate areas until midway in the second semester. But we put them in the classroom together. They work on shows together. They are always together. They come to count on each other. And one of the things I think about a scenographic approach is there's a lot of criticism that goes on in the classroom among students, because all of a sudden we're empowering someone who is a costume designer to look at the lighting designer in that particular class and say, do you not get it? I have a blue dress on stage. I don't want you using red light. I want you using clear light. If I wanted her in a muddy gray dress, I would have put her in a muddy gray dress. So early in the process, they learn to stand up for themselves. They learn to express their needs as a designer. Now, yes, that sometimes can turn into some pretty hurt feelings. The question here is, how do you have a difference of opinion as an artist with another artist who's working with you, and how do you express that opinion without making it personal? And so if you can keep the personality out of it, which is hard, because all we hear, I think, is that's not a very good idea, or gee, were you so stupid you thought red light was going to work? It's hard to couch it in a way that they hear it in a way that it's meant to be heard. And I think there's a real skill in that, and that probably comes with a bit of experience, and that probably comes with being in those conversations. I mean, it's even if it could be if you jump a different direction completely. It's like interviewing for a job. Your first interview is going to be rough. Your first criticism of someone may be rough. By the time you're on your 10th interview, you understand how to negotiate those currents and flows of the interview. The same thing if you're in a design meeting, a production meeting. after a rehearsal, you learn how to speak to someone in a way that is reaffirming rather than looking at them and the subtext as you're destroying the show with your stupid idea.
Can I jump in on Steve? Something that you said really resonates, and I think is beautifully said about it being personal. And I think somehow, I don't know if this is useful, but I've tried to develop this, that the idea is not of me, it comes through me. So the idea and me are separate things. But if I internalize the idea that the idea is Stan, and somebody doesn't like the idea, then Stan is hurt. So I'm just a conduit for ideas, and the ideas come and go. It's like thoughts, right? Thoughts come and go. It's like when I do meditation, it's like the thoughts are not yours. You're just observing these thoughts coming and going through your brain. But when you attach yourself and your identity to the idea or the thought, that's when we get in trouble. So I think there's something beautiful about what you said about it's not personal. And you're right. I think the hard part is when you're offering feedback or response, it's not connected to the person. It's connected to this idea, which nobody really owns, right? It's just an idea.
Well, a lot of people know who Anne Valentino and Sarah Clausen are. And you can go back and you can look at our season 2 interviews with them. They are developers of consoles. And Sarah Clausen said something that I thought was really interesting. And she says, when we're releasing new software, people call me up and yell at me because something has happened. And she said, I have learned that they're not yelling at me.
Right.
They're yelling at the software. Mm-hmm. And I just need to let them get that out of their system.
Makes sense.
But I mean, I think that's a really amazing thing to be able to separate yourself from that attack, particularly when they are attacking you personally.
Yeah.
So I remember when she said that, I thought that's really quite clever.
That's profound. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to separate yourself from an idea that came into your brain, right? Your brain. Well, it's just the brain that you have, and the creativity resides in you. But the idea is, it's not like, it's not yours. To loosen up about ideas just flow through you. And I think that's one way to separate yourself from the ego, in a sense, and really be. There's another nice quote about that. A friend of mine used to have this on his little costume designer, and was talking about design, and it said, "Be transparent." It's like the you with the capital Y is not the thing that's coming up with the ideas. It's another part of you that's a place in you that is a conduit for creativity.
It all comes down to respecting the synergy that you can only get when you have a group of artists working on a project. People shouldn't take ownership of ideas, that the ideas, you may not have had that idea without the inspiration from your colleague sitting next to you. So if you respect that process and the power of group thinking and group creation, then the ego is not going to be there anymore. So I don't know, but that's a big step. And to ask that for young students is really kind of difficult. Some get it, but some don't, because a lot of it's maturity.
I think it's a difficult task of anybody.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, you're sitting there, you're pouring your heart and soul into something that you've been working on for X amount of hours and weeks and days and months. Right. And at the production meeting that night, the director says, I think the lights are all way too bright. Mm-hmm. This is just not working for the show at all. Man, there's a door that just got slammed in your face.
Yeah.
And it is really hard. I mean, it's not about ego. It's about...
Well, that's pride.
I'm rejecting everything that you've just done.
Well, not necessarily, because remember, the director is kind of the person in charge and is responsible for making a unified production. So the director may be seeing something that you may have missed, or also maybe it's a different idea that you didn't understand at first. You didn't understand it, so now it's clever. Hey, sometimes it even happens to me, with directors I've worked with for 30 shows, that, David, that's not what we talked about. And I was like, oh really? And then I don't argue. I don't say, no, you said you wanted this all blue, this scene. No, because obviously I misunderstood something. And then I get on the tracks again. You got to get on the tracks again. That's really, really important. So I don't know, Steve.
No. I turned to him and go, "No, you moron! You told me you wanted to see blue,
That
and you even
moron.
said it was going to be R80, and you didn't want to see any light coming through the windows."
Let me throw one more word out there. I think that's also really hard to do, and I think for any artist, is to maintain or even get objectivity about your own work. That we look at our work, like Steve said, you poured your heart and soul into it all these weeks and months, and now somebody comes along and says that's not working for whatever reasons, and you have to sort of, it's hard to find the place in you that just really looks at it objectively and can say, they're right, or objectively, can I really see what they're seeing with my eyes, not with my attachment, right? And just see objectively. I think that's hard for every artist to do because so much of it comes from inside of us, and objectivity is very hard to maintain. And I think it's just a constant practice of standing back and going, what is my response to that without attaching myself to it? It's hard.
I turn to my assistant and say, "What do you think? What do you really think?"
That's good.
And my assistant says, "Oh, Steve, your way was the best. But we can't do it that way."
Your assistant is playing the political game of knowing who hires him or her.
You know what I like about my assistant is we were working on a particularly difficult project, and she was sitting beside me, and things were kind of going south. And I noticed that she was a couple seats away from me at the next tech. And I said, "Why are you sitting so far away?" And she goes, "It's because you're in the doghouse right now." When you're not in the doghouse, she says, "I don't want that stink on me. I'll come back when you're in better shape."
That's funny.
Nothing like loyalty. Well, Steve has our last question of the day.
Yes, it's from Tony in Virginia. And Tony writes, "I am doing my first club date in a month. What are some good rock and roll colors?" All right, Tony, this is an easy one. Get out a piece of paper and a pencil. What you need 8 colors. Some people would say less, but you're a club date. You need white, cyan, magenta, red, amber, a blue of your choice, a green of your choice, and this is the secret.
I know
Here's
where
the secret sauce.
Go ahead.
You need Congo blue.
Of course, you got to have Congo blue.
Congo blue it puts a little zing on everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Front of house, I just use lighter variations of that.
Well, I think we heard it from the expert.
I'm not going to challenge Steve on his rock and roll palette.
Never, not when it comes to rock and roll. Although, I wonder if Mark Brickman uses those colors still. I know.
Did you say magenta, Steve? Did you have a magenta?
He said magenta. He said magenta.
He did.
Yeah, you got to have
white, cyan, magenta, red, amber, blue of your choice. I would go with a dark blue, a green, and Congo.
Well, that's pretty much covering it.
No
all.
yellow. No yellow.
Yellow's for weak-willed designers.
Sign me up
Well,
for yellow.
I could say this a different way to Tony. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you have white and Congo. Fill in your own 5 or 6 in the middle.
And make sure that you're on the beat. No, you got to have a good sense of rhythm. That's for damn sure. So, hey, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can listen to us on all your favorite podcast sites, including Spotify, iTunes, and now on livedesignonline.com. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
But remember, if you choose to litigate us, our law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and deep in the heart of Texas.
And tune in next week when we talk about smelly lights, shark's tooth scrims, and making sure your accessories don't fall off the lights and hit the audience in the head.
All that and the new sponsor. Light Talk is broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we will see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
So long, everyone.